Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talks at Google. I'm really excited here to speak to you today and introduce you our speaker, Darren J. Gold. I first met Darren when he was a speaker at a TEDx event. And I reached out to him after the event because I was so impressed. And I basically said that was a very fascinating talk. Great job. I went back and I started Googling and I said, let me see who Darren Gold is. And I realized he's kind of a big deal. Darren trained as a lawyer. He worked at McKinsey and Company. He has been the CEO of 2 companies. His latest book, which I have right here, Master Your Code, The Art, Wisdom, and Science of Leading an Extraordinary Life. Darren today is a managing partner at Triumph Consulting, where he coaches executives and their leadership team. Please join me in welcoming Darren J. Gold.
Hi, Samya. Nice to see you, and thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure and privilege to be with you.
Of course. Thank you, Darren. Darren, I wanted to begin from the very beginning. I know what fascinated me most was listening to your story, your childhood experiences, and how they shaped you and your path forward.
Yeah, I'd be happy to comment and maybe just acknowledge the extraordinary times that we're in right now, and to recognize that I'm humbled to be even speaking today with your colleagues and listeners, given the gravity of the events that are taking place, and just want to acknowledge how difficult of a situation it is for everyone, and I'm sure we'll touch on some of that as we speak. Yeah. I'm also highly aware of my own privilege in this moment, and just want to make sure that we bring that into the conversation and honor it and respect it as I think we must. My childhood, it used to be a story that I was very reluctant to share, partly because I didn't think it was that interesting, and partly because I was a little embarrassed, by it. I grew up in a very dysfunctional home. Raised by a single father. Both of my parents spent intermittent times in jail. My mother, unfortunately, succumbed to drug abuse and alcohol addiction. My father turned to a life of crime even before I was born. But I entered the world in that environment. The one antidote was my father, who was extremely loving towards me. And it was in many respects, the sort of protective force against a very turbulent and volatile environment. But it was in that environment that, like most of us, I shaped how I saw myself, how I saw others, and how I saw the world. And one of the most important beliefs that I adopted in the midst of all that volatility was the importance of learning, the importance of education, the importance of getting ahead in life. And it very much propelled me onto a path of trying to get ahead. And I was the first in my family to go to college, and then ultimately entered the professional world. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But it's those beliefs that form in early childhood that I got really curious about and interested about, and really form the basis of the book.
Yeah. And Dan, our topic today is the human superpower. What does that mean?
I tell this story both in the TEDx talk that you heard me give and in my book, and I'll share it now because I think it's so powerful and so illustrative. It's sort of basic and a little antiquated, but the basic story is, and it'll begin to illustrate this what I call the human superpower. 2 shoe salesmen in the year 1900. They're based in London, England, and they're asked by their home office to go to a developing country to see if there's a market for shoes. And they get on the long journey across the ocean. It takes 4 days. They arrive at their destination, and they're exhausted. And they go into the village, and all they can see are thousands of people, all of whom aren't wearing shoes. So they run back to the port, and they telegraph back to the home office. And the first shoe salesman says, "Total disaster. No one here wears shoes. I'll be on the next boat home." The second shoe salesman says, "Glorious opportunity. No one here wears shoes yet. Please send more inventory fast." And what that story speaks to, as antiquated as it may be, is this human superpower, which is the ability to choose the meaning we give to our circumstances. And life shows up as a series of opportunities to give meaning to our circumstances. And the human superpower is our ability to choose that. Choose a disempowering meaning and we'll lead a disempowered life. Choose an empowering meaning and we'll lead an extraordinary life. And it's sort of at the root of what I bring into my work with senior leaders, because we confront really volatile and complex environments. And today, what we're going through right now is an extreme version of that. How we make meaning of it will determine the actions that are even available to us to take, and therefore the results that we get. And so it's uncovering and discovering that human superpower that's really at the source of effectiveness in life.
Yeah, and I think Dan, you talk about this too, about how some of the beliefs and our childhood experiences that may have shaped us, we end up living almost our adult life, and I think you refer to that as our program.
Yeah.
And then that somehow may actually end up limiting us into not getting into our full potential. So can you speak a little bit more about that too?
Yeah, I offer at the beginning of the book what I believe is a critical distinction, and I use the distinction between program and code. So we're on Google's platform here, so that should resonate for people. I define a program as a set of subconscious, safety-based beliefs, values, and rules that automatically drive your behavior and limit your results. Most of those are formed in childhood. And I contrast that with a code, which is a consciously chosen set of beliefs, values, and rules that really are purposefully designed to serve you and produce extraordinary results. And it's this ability to choose and author our own code that's at the source of an extraordinary life. I share in the book that I was almost 40 years old when I woke up to the fact that I was living a life being run by a program written by a 7-year-old boy. And you can see the absurdity of that. It's a program that served me well and got me to the point I had gotten in life, but it was woefully inadequate to lead the kind of life that I wanted to lead. And it was that discovery that really changed everything for me. I oftentimes use the analogy of a smartphone. And imagine you're trying to use your smartphone, and it's an Android phone. And you're trying to use it in the year 2020 based on an operating system from 5 years ago, right? It just won't work. And so much of our own psychology, we can draw that sort of analogy to. And we're leading complex lives in complex roles. We're leading families, we're leading ourselves, certainly. We're leading teams and we're leading organizations, running an operating system that is years behind where it needs to be. And it's this upgrading of your operating system from a program to a code that I think is the most powerful discovery a human being can make. And that's the sort of distinction that I draw. And then I argue that there are 10 essential lines of code. Yeah. And I use each one of them as chapters in the book.
Yeah. Yeah. Dan, and that when you say that served you well in your initial years, can you expand that and a little bit more about something that served you well in your initial years, but then you realized you had to change it to make it more of a code?
Yeah. One of the frameworks that I offer in the book is something called a survival strategy. And my argument is that when you're a child, every child has a traumatic experience. It can be serious trauma, or it can be what I call sort of lowercase t trauma. You're teased, you're bullied, and you're made to feel unsafe. And as a child, you're going to do whatever it takes to feel safe. And so you develop one of 3 primary survival strategies. That happened to me. I came from London, England. I was a 7-year-old boy. I showed up in Southern California, and I can say it's really cool to have an English accent if you're 18 years old. It's not so cool if you're 7 or 8. And I was teased. And so in that moment, unconsciously or subconsciously, I developed a survival strategy, which was I have to be liked. And I developed this power of being likable. But I did it at all costs. And it served me well. And I succeeded in school and in my early part of my career, but it really reached the limits of its effectiveness. I had a lot of difficulty having direct and honest conversations with people. And for those of you that are, working or even not, having the ability to be direct and honest with people is a critical skill. And I was, that likability obsession was really getting in the way of it. And so it's one of many examples of the kinds of strategies or rules that we put in place early on that we do no longer see as rules. They just are the way the world works, that both serve us and are limited and limit us.
Can you explain that a little bit more, Dan, to say that how did you change that, recognize the likability code, and then how did you go about changing that?
Yeah, a lot of it is
or expand it. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, expand it, exactly. That's another great distinction and really nice nuance, and I'll pick up on that in a little bit. The power of distinction. So I offered a couple already: program and code, survival strategy, and distinctions. This is the power of language, and I talk a little bit about distinctions, and I'll offer an explanation here and then answer your question. So distinctions are the use of language to create openings for people to see what they didn't know they didn't know. And I'd like to say there are three domains. There's the domain of what I know. That's pretty small. Or there's the domain of what I know I don't know. That's where traditional learning and development happens. And that's pretty, it's a little bigger. And then there's this enormous infinite domain of what I don't know. And it's in that domain where most of our most profound growth occurs. So when I became aware through my own learning and my own investment and my own growth of this distinction around survival strategies, that actually being liked was a choice. It was a construction. I like to say there are three things about beliefs. One is every single belief you have is made up. Number two, it's mostly designed, beliefs are mostly designed to keep you safe. And number three, because they're made up, they can be reconstructed. When I learned that, I said, holy cow, I've been living my whole life with this intense need to be likable. And it's a total construction. I get to choose, I get to make it up. It was an immense amount of freedom. And to your earlier point, I said, what would it look like if I expanded my belief set from I must be liked at all costs to, yeah, it's important to be liked, but I've got whole degrees of freedom to put that at risk. And that opened up a big area of growth for me that wasn't available to me before, with a subconscious belief around likability. So in my work with business leaders, I oftentimes will get at those sort of core beliefs and values and rules that have existed at the subconscious level, and we bring them into consciousness.
Okay. And then Dan, you mentioned this earlier too, and you have 10 chapters with like 10 codes in there. Is there one that resonates more than the others? Or is this one that you think is most important?
Yeah, it's always hard to pick. It's like picking a favorite child. There's no upside to admitting that. The one I sort of turn to, because there's so much research and evidence to support this, is the fourth chapter, which I titled "I'm 100% responsible for my life." And what I do in that chapter is I raised this psychological phenomenon called locus of control. 50 years ago, a psychologist named Julian Rotter determined that human beings lie on the spectrum of locus of control. On one end is an external locus of control, which is the world happens to me, circumstances shape me, there's very little I can do to affect my situation. And on the other end is people that have an internal locus of control, which is a belief about their circumstances, that there's always something I can do to affect my circumstances. I shape my circumstances, not the other way around. And I like to say neither one is more inherently true, because there's always situations where we can't affect our circumstances, and there are plenty of situations where we can. But holding the belief that I'm 100% responsible for my life, that I shape my circumstances, that there's always something I can do to affect my situation, even when I'm in a really difficult, trying situation, is a game changer. And as I study leadership, and I'm a student of leadership, it may be the one variable that I would point to as most determinative of success. And we now have 50 years of research that people with an internal locus of control have vastly superior outcomes in almost every dimension of life: health, finances, career, education, you name it. And the problem is the default human belief is an external locus of control. The world happens to me. I get to avoid responsibility. It's a very seductive place. We all have been there, and we all go there a lot.
Yeah.
And the big breakthrough is to sort of be able to see that and to move into what I call a responsible mindset. And it's a very, very powerful place to be. Powerful in the best sense of that word, meaning It gives you access to action, to do something, to effectuate change, to do good in the world from, even in the most trying of circumstances.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. Yeah. And then Dan, as a parent, I was thinking you've had your childhood experiences, which you now recognize have shaped you. Yeah. You're a parent too. What advice do you have for parents, maybe? And because we're influencing our child here, and then their experiences to help them with a path forward.
Yeah,
are you doing things differently as a parent?
I am, and I would say my parenting has evolved, and it continues. I have a 20-year-old, 18-year-old, and a 14-year-old. So I'm still very much, I'm definitely in a different stage of parenting, but still parenting. I think the most important thing for me is taking this responsibility, a principle, and applying it to my parenting. So I write in my book, and whenever I talk about whether it's parenting or whether it's leading. To me, those are two things. We're trying to influence in the best world and lead others to do really good things. And I always start with the principle, you cannot ask others to do things that you aren't consistently doing and embodying and role modeling yourself. So my parenting is, I try to always come from a place of, if I am complaining about my children, I turn inward. I say, where is it that I'm doing the very thing I'm complaining about? Right? My children aren't listening to me. Where is it that I'm not listening to my children? Oh my gosh, I can find 100 things I'm doing. And I go there first. I take responsibility for the very thing I'm frustrated about. And I said, what would it look like if I listened to my children in the way that I'd like them to listen to me? And I go there first. And only when I'm fully embodying that do I even attempt to offer advice to my children. Because I think when we're in a privileged place of parenting or leading, what it means to be authentic, an authentic parent and an authentic leader, is when the very thing that you're asking others to do, you are fully embodied, and people can sniff that out. They will see an inauthentic parent and an inauthentic leader. And so that's my most important, that made the number one principle. I think the most important principle is love. Yeah. And I think that I learned from my father. I learned what it looks like to be loved by another human being unconditionally. And it was the most incredible gift a human being could give to another human being. And I was determined when I became a parent to, if I did nothing else, I would love my children. I would love them unconditionally. And I believe for the most part, there are times where you lose yourself as a parent. I have done that. It's probably the part that I'm most proud of is the love that I give my children, and everything else becomes sort of secondary. They're going to be who they're going to be. And as long as I love them is really, and there's one other thing, if you don't mind me adding. There's a great story by Jane Goodall, the primatologist. She tells a story when she was, I think, 3 or 4 years old, and she hid out in a barn because she was so fascinated with hens and how they laid eggs that she wanted to see it happen. And she went into the barn, and she was gone for hours, and family woke up in their farmhouse, and they couldn't find this little girl, and they summoned the police, and there was a search and rescue mission, and she came out. And a normal parent would be like, what did you do? You took 5 years from my life, right? This mother had the wisdom to see in her child's eyes that this little girl had a gift. And rather than berating her or scolding her, she said, tell me all about it, sweetheart. And there's something in that story, which is, as parents, we have the ability to see the gift in each of our children and to nurture it and honor it. And so another part of my parenting that I learned a little later in parenting was, what is it in my child that needs to be expressed, and how do I see it and give it a name and nurture it? And I think that's another part of my sort of approach to parenting.
Okay. Lots to learn there. I have a 16-year-old.
lots to learn from you. One plug for a great book. I give this to every new parent. I have a colleague who just had a baby yesterday. Like, talk about bringing a baby into the world right now. Is Shefali Sabari's book, A Conscious Parent. And she has a great line in the book. She says, children exist for the parent's transformation, not the other way around. And if I were to sort of sum up parenting in one phrase, it's that line from her. I think she's extraordinary.
Okay. Dan, I see there's a question here. What 3 books have shaped your understanding that you can share with us?
Oh, wow. That's really, I'm such a, by the way, I love the question, and I am such an avid reader. So let me just make a plug for read. And I think we can do many things right now in this time to take action. One of the things that I'm encouraging leaders to do, one of many things, and my team, is to read, to get educated, to be curious, to learn. There's so much I don't understand about what's going on right now. There's so much I have to learn, and I'm committed to doing that. And so I'm just a big believer in learning in general. And for me, books have been a great source of learning. So many, this is a very obscure book, and there's probably 20. I'm just going to pick 3 at random. There's a book by Jack London called Martin Eden. And it's a story of an autodidact, meaning a self-learner, and that sort of really influenced me. I'm not just saying it because of the time. I really love the autobiography of Malcolm X. It was a massive eye-opener for me. And then I love this book, if it's understood in the right way, by Edwin Friedman, called A Failure of Nerve. I ask a lot of the CEOs that I work with to read the book. There's a lot of subtlety and nuance in that book. It's very provocative, and I suggest reading it for that reason. And there's so many others, but those are the 3 that sort of just come to mind.
Okay. Dan, given the current situation we are in, and I know you spend a lot of time coaching and advising leaders, what advice do you have for people, managers, or just for individuals when we show up at work? What can we do differently? What should we be aware of?
Well, let me first just say that there are so many other people that are more equipped than I am to answer that question. And I say that really, really genuinely. And so I think, first of all, go and find those people and listen to them. And there are lots of them lots of people that I think have incredible wisdom and advice. Where I say somewhat in my lane on this question, because I'm a student of leadership, and I wrote a post this weekend, and the argument I make in that post is we have a crisis of leadership more than anything else in this country, and that's not getting political. It's at almost every level, and there are exceptions. There's some great leadership, but overall, I think a lot of us can agree that there's a lack of leadership. And I say, oftentimes when I find myself frustrated, outraged, angry, confused, and I think a lot of us are feeling that right now. I know certainly I am, and my colleagues are, and my clients are. I turn to the advice of Mother Teresa, who said, if everyone would clean their own doorstep, the world would be clean. And there's something very powerful in those words. It's very Gandhian as well, which goes back again to this essential notion of responsibility. What is it within my own sphere of control that I can do, that I can take responsibility for? How can I lead? What can I do to lead in a way that's consistent with the world that I want to live in? So oftentimes we spend a lot of our energy complaining and judging and posting on social media, and it's all good, right? I mean, we want our voices to get out there. And sometimes we neglect to sweep our own front doorstep. We neglect to ask the question, what would it look like to be an extraordinary parent? To bring the values that I'd like to see in the world into my home consistently. What would it look like to lead my team with love and compassion and kindness? And these questions that really begin with, what can I do within the place that I can control, and then expand out from there. So oftentimes, that's where I start with my leaders, is like the leaders that I have the privilege to work with, is start inside. And what do you control? And the privilege that I have, and my firm has, the Trium Group, is we are working with the leaders of some very large organizations that have the ability to really move the needle. And so we're really using our privileged position for good. Our mission is to change the world by changing the way business leaders think. If there was a time to change the way we think, it's right now.
Yeah, I think that what's resonated with me in your talk and in our conversation today, and even in your book, is avoiding this victim mentality. like seeing what I can do, what's within my control, what can I change, and then start with small actions. So thank you for repeating that again. There was a question here. There's a question from Anthony. He says, thank you so much for your allyship. Do you find similarities between raising children and coaching executives?
That's going to get me in a lot of trouble answering that. And the reality is, yes and no, right? But I think one of the myths is that, executives have it all figured out, particularly executives at, in high up places, right? They've gotten to this far in their career. How have they not figured everything out? And the reality is they're human beings like every one of us, with a lot of growth and development opportunities. And so maybe to answer the question a little bit differently is I do bring parenting into my coaching because of the parallels that I alluded to before, right? Yeah. There's the lessons that I've learned as a parent are almost always applicable to how I lead and how I coach others to lead. And so, and oftentimes the leaders I'm working with have children. And so it's fertile ground, right? I don't create a separation. I don't believe that there's this work and home. And now we're kind of seeing that, right, come together. But my coaching is coaching the whole person. And oftentimes we go into the realm of family and parenting because the best leadership lessons are lessons in raising children, in my view. Yeah. You want to get really frustrated, right, trying to get someone to do something, be a parent. And then you'll forget about your team. So, yeah.
Okay. I see another question here from Nandita. She wants to know, what was that one advice that changed your perspective on life?
Wow. The one advice that changed my perspective on life. Well, it is this, I was told at a very, it's sort of in the middle of my career, this idea that I get to choose how I make meaning of the world. And that was revolutionary. It may seem so obvious, right, when you hear it. For me, it was not. I was on autopilot. I mean, I was doing really well, like by all standard measures. I had really incredible success. And as I look back on my childhood, it was like I pinched myself every morning. And yet, I was not in choice about who I wanted to be, how I wanted to show up in the world. And when I got the advice and was given the distinction around this, I didn't call it program of code. I had no language for it at the time, or the human superpower. It sort of came out just a year ago and how I was describing this. It was a game changer. And I remember very distinctly going in front of a large group to give a speech. And I had always been reasonably good at it, but had always been really concerned about how do I show up. And for the first time, I got up on a stage and spoke to a large group of people without almost any concern for self. And it was one of the most liberating feelings I'd ever had. And so that advice that I got, that I'm really trying to give right now is, knowing how much is driving you and how much in choice you can be it is a superpower, in my view.
Yeah. I see another question here from Bora. Trying to paraphrase. Okay. Is there a prerequisite for reaching the stage of enlightenment that one has been running on program? So do I need to be successful first?
Well, no, and I'm not even sure I understand what the word successful means, right? Like it's so loaded, that word in our culture and in our society. But and I love the question, by the way. I really thank you, whoever asked that question. It's a great question. And let me just look at it again. A prerequisite. The prerequisite is awareness. It's the first chapter of my book, and I share this very short story of two younger fish swimming along, and they're swimming, and an older fish swims by, and he says, "Hey fellas, how's the water?" And they look back at the older fish that just swam by, and they say, "What the hell is water?" And so that's for me, it's sort of a comical but very illustrative example of we just have no idea. So the prerequisite is we wake up. We're aware that we've got a bunch of beliefs, values, and rules that have been largely subconscious. They're driving how we behave, and we begin to see the connection between what we believe that have been unquestioned and unexamined and how we behave. And that's the prerequisite. And I probably wouldn't call it enlightenment, because I think there's no end stage here. This is a path of mastery. And in very many respects, the book is a book about self-mastery. But it begins, the prerequisite is building a foundation of awareness, really beginning to understand yourself before you try to do anything.
Okay. Dan, I know we're almost getting to be on time here, but is there anything else that you would like to share with the Googlers here?
Wow. Well, I think maybe you asked me at the beginning what the favorite chapter. Let me offer a close second, or maybe a tie for that, and just a plug. And this is in my TEDx talk, but this notion of identity. And it's not identity in terms of identity politics and things like that. It's a more simple, fundamental term which describes the beliefs you hold about yourself. Those may be the most important beliefs, right? We talked a little bit about the beliefs you hold about your circumstances. Yeah. The beliefs I hold about myself, my self-concept, my identity, shapes who I am. The most powerful driver of human behavior is the desire to be consistent with your identity. It's almost impossible to take actions that are inconsistent with the beliefs you hold about yourself. And if there's one set of beliefs that I would really encourage you to take a hard look at, is what beliefs are you holding about yourself? And a lot of them look like this, even for really successful people. I'm not good enough, right? There's a whole set of beliefs around that. And this notion that we have an identity, that we can reshape and reconstruct it, and we get to choose whatever identity it is a real game changer. And I do a lot of work in my coaching around what I call identity reconstruction. So that's the last little thing I'd want to leave you with.
Actually, I have one more question I just remembered, and I wanted to ask you when I met you today. I know you also talk about my calling, right? Like finding your calling. But how do I find my calling? And when I do find my calling, what do I do with it? How do I cultivate it? It seems like I know it's the right thing to do, but where do I even begin?
It's such an important question. I'm glad you waited till the end, because you allowed me to warm up a little bit. It's actually my last chapter for a good reason, because it's a hard question to answer. And I get asked it a lot, how do I figure out my purpose in life, particularly by younger people? And oftentimes my advice is be patient. It will emerge when it's supposed to. It can emerge, as a child, like, Jane Goodall at age 3, or you could be 70 years old, and you just got to be attuned to it. I think the harder you look for it, the more obscure it will be. There's one incredible framework, maybe just to give you a more practical answer, that I love. It's a Japanese term called ikigai, and it literally means the reason for getting up out of bed in the morning. And it describes the intersection of these 4 things: what I'm good at, what I love to do, what the world needs, and what I can get paid for. And if you kind of I love that. It's a very practical framework to figure out, if I ask those questions and we're honest about answering them, the intersection of that could be a good clue as to what my calling could be. And then the last thing I'd leave you with, which is perhaps my favorite quote in relation to this question, is Abraham Maslow, the psychologist, who said, "What one can be, one must be." And I love that, because if there's anything that defines sort of a universal human purpose, it's self-actualization. If all you're doing is becoming a better version of yourself every single day, you've found your purpose. What your vocation is, like, all that is sort of window dressing. To me, self-mastery, self-actualization is the most noble purpose, and it's sort of the essential purpose of being human, in my humble view.
Darren, thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
It was a really pleasure and privilege to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.